Hi, this is Julia Walker with Grey Duck Forge, and today we will be reviewing all of the scientific names of the joints in both front and hind legs in as much detail as an educated farrier ought to know. Easy, right? My plan here is to breeze through these names so you have a quick reference available. It's not necessarily easy to have these all memorized if you haven't learned these names before, and if you need a slower, more methodical introduction to the names of the joints, check out my joint naming conventions video for a more thorough description. But with all that being said, let's jump into this. First, a quick review of the rules. We name joints based on the names of the bones that comprise them, starting with the bone on top, and then the letter O, and then the bone on bottom, then the letters AL, and then the word joint. It's just a formula, so it's the type of bone that matters for these names, not like which number exactly. So, for example, we have the joint between the scapula and the humerus, having the words for scapula and humerus in there, with that O and that AL, kind of forms that word scapulohumeral joint. This is the standard form. But for, say, the metacarpophalangeal joint, we don't care that it's the third metacarpal bone and the first phalanx bone. We know where a metacarpal bone touches a phalanx bone, meaning that fetlock area. Cool. We also use the term inter to describe joints between bones of the same name. Like between phalanx bones, we have the interphalangeal joints. Mid also fills a similar role, like in the midcarpal joint, so that is another one. But it's all same. And then if we have joints with similar names and need to differentiate them further, we can use words like proximal and distal, like the proximal interphalangeal joint being above the distal interphalangeal joint. And those are the main rules. So starting at the top of the leg, we have the bones listed on the right in descending order. It's important to know the scientific names of all of the bones in the limbs to be able to come up with the scientific names of the joints. So make sure you have those down pat before continuing. But we have that scapula first, and then the humerus. So we have the scapulohumeral joint. Cool. And then humerus radius. That gives us the humeroradial joint. And lastly, we have a joint between the radius and the knee, or the carpus. It's full of carpal bones, so that makes it the radiocarpal joint. And then in the carpus, or knee, we have sort of two main layers of bones. We know that the top joint is that radiocarpal joint that we just labeled, which incidentally is a joint in the knee with lots of movement allowed. Then we have a joint between a bunch of carpal bones. These are all carpal bones, and we know that we need to use inter or mid for joints between bones with similar names, and in this case, we call the joint between carpal bones the midcarpal joint. According to Gregory's textbook. Some sources refer to it as the intercarpal joint, but as long as you know that it's a joint between the carpal bones, that is the main thing. But burn the words midcarpal joint into your memory for certification purposes at least. That joint also has a good amount of movement in it, kind of like that top radiocarpal joint. Those are the two that you see the spaces in when a horse bends their knee. And this midcarpal joint actually shares joint fluid with the bottom joint in here. Kind of cool. That bottom joint being between carpal bones and the metacarpals down here, that means that top bones first, we have the metacarpal joint. Cool. Then we have the joints of the leg from the knee down. We just left off with that carpometacarpal joint. And then we have the metacarpophalangeal joint, where the metacarpals, or a metacarpal, I should say, meets a phalanx bone. Metacarpophalangeal Phalangeal, that's a long word, joint. Cool. And then we have some phalanx bones going down, so between phalanx bones, interphalangeal joints, one up top, one down below. So a proximal interphalangeal joint, and then a distal interphalangeal joint. Cool, and that's the front leg, all the joints. Easy peasy. Now we can take a look at the hind limb. Up top, we have the pelvis bone, also scientifically known as the coxa bone, according to Wikipedia. And the joint between the pelvis and the femur is then called that coxofemoral joint. Cool. Next we have the joint between kind of the main bones being the femur and the tibia. So that gives us the femorotibial joint. Then at the bottom there, we have the tibia connecting with the tarsal bones, tarsus. So that gives us the tibiotarsal joint, sometimes written tibial tarsal joint, or another name that it is called is the tarsocrural joint. That's an R, and then, yeah, like tarsal C rural, is how it's spelled. Tarsocrural joint. Hopefully I'm saying that right. That's one name I don't know the origin of, so if you're watching this and you know why it's called that, let me know in the comments. We're all curious, but I don't know. And so, starting off with that tibiotarsal joint, within the hock, we have a couple more joints, because of the layout of this whole region is a bit more complicated than the knee. Not a lot more, just slightly more. So we've got that tibiotarsal joint up top, which is actually the joint in the hock that is like supposed to articulate and move in that whole hock region. You remember this talus bone has like condyles in it, like a couple ridges that point like, 15 degrees off of center, slightly outward so that the hind legs can come up outside of the front legs when they come forward. So that tibiotarsal joint is the joint that moves when a horse's hocks move. Kind of cool. But now we've got that talus bone, we've got this calcaneus bone, I'll label it CA, and then underneath we've got like the central tarsal bone, and this here is like the third tarsal bone, and over here is the fourth tarsal bone. So at any rate, we've got this talus and the calcaneus both being tarsal bones, and then more tarsal bones underneath. So it's going to be an intertarsal joint. There's also another intertarsal joint down here between tarsal bones, so we'll need a proximal and a distal. So this one will be that proximal intertarsal joint, and then this one on the left here will be the distal intertarsal joint. Cool. And then on the bottom there, another joint that doesn't move much at all, is going to be between the tarsal bones and the metatarsal bones, so tarso-metatarsal joint. Cool. So there's that tarso-metatarsal joint labeled. The lower limb on hind legs is about the same as on front legs in terms of joint names. So next one down, we've got metatarsal bone meeting a phalanx bone. So that gives us a metatarso-phalangeal joint. And then again, same as on the front leg, proximal interphalangeal joint and a distal cool. So proximal interphalangeal and distal interphalangeal joint. The main thing to remember about joint names below the knee and hock, in terms of differentiating them on the front leg versus the hind leg, is that that metacarpal, metatarsal difference. So you don't want to point out like the fetlock joint on a hind leg and call it the metacarpophalangeal joint, because that'll just make it sound like you're lost, because you're talking about the front end at that point. So, but that's the only thing to really note back here. And that's it. That is all of the joints. Nice job hanging in there. Hopefully that was a helpful, quick review of the scientific names of all the joints, and we also included the knee and the hock. I figured a full-on review of the joint names would be more helpful for your toolbox than like a super specific video about the knee and hock. So, and yeah, if you know the rules of how joint names are formed and the names of the bones, this should all be pretty logical to you. But thank you for watching. It was fun as always. We will be continuing this series in the next video, where we will be covering the bone anatomy that we farriers should know. As always, if you have any comments, corrections, or feedback, please send them my way via the comments section below. You can also give this video a thumbs up if you want. It'll probably make me smile, but it's cool either way. Don't feel pressured. Thank you for joining me, and as always, stay tuned for more.